This is from Mark 7:31 through 37, and Mark 8:11 through 13. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, in the region of Decapolis. And they brought to him a man who was deaf and had a speech impediment, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. And taking him aside from the crowd privately, he put his fingers into his ears, and after spitting, touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. And Jesus charged them to tell no one. But the more he charged them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, He has done all things well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. This is the word of the Lord.
Great work. Great work. What we've been doing for the past, few months now, we've been looking at the first 8 chapters of the Gospel of Mark, which are really all oriented around answering one particular question, which is, who is Jesus? And so as we look at these stories and these accounts, we are getting an opportunity to answer that question for ourselves. As you see what Jesus is doing and how he's interacting and how he functions, you can come to your own conclusions. And I think what's really helpful about this passage, or I guess these 2 stories that John Walker just read for us, is because what's unique about them is they don't just give you a window into what Jesus said or what Jesus did, but into how Jesus felt, how a little glimpse into his emotional life. I don't know if you noticed when he read it, but twice in each of these stories, Jesus sighs. He lets out this noise. Look at chapter 7, verse 34. And looking up to heaven, he sighed. In chapter 8, verse 12, and he sighed deeply in his spirit. So I think that's interesting. Let's take some time to just think about that. And I want to think about this under 3 headings. First, that Jesus sighed, that he sighs. Secondly, why he sighs. And then thirdly, what Jesus sighing might mean for us. What in the world does that have to do with you and me? So first, we'll just look at the fact that he sighs, and then second, why he does it, and then so what it matters to you and me. So first, that, drawing attention to the fact that Jesus sighs is interesting. People sigh for lots of different reasons. You can sigh because you're getting older and getting up from a sitting position's not quite as easy as it used to be. I know when I get up, my children make fun of me for that, so that's a sigh. You can sigh because you're just bored, just looking out the window. You can sigh when you're, exhausted, like you come from a day of just meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, and then you're scrambling to go pick up your kids, and then there's traffic, and you're dealing with this, and you come home on 2 wheels, and it's time to cook dinner, you're already late, and you open up the fridge, and you realize you forgot to go to the grocery this morning like you thought, and you go, That's a sigh. I don't think when Jesus sighs, it's because he's getting old, or he's bored, or he's exhausted. When Jesus sighs, that word could also be translated groan, which is this deep guttural noise. And in fact, that's how Eugene Peterson translates it when he does his paraphrase, The Message. I don't know if you've ever read The Message, but his translation says that, quote, Jesus groaned mightily. But when you groan, when you sigh, that is an expression of heartfelt pain. It's anguish. Whenever we are together as a community group, our community group here at Redeemer, I guess this is also true in other groups I've been a part of, but I've just started to notice that in group settings, when someone shares something vulnerable about their life that is particularly hard, and they share it, I've just started to notice people just make sounds. They go, mm, mm. It's this sound of, I don't know what to say. There are no words, but something has to come out. And that's the sound. It's this groan of, ugh. When Jesus sees people who are experiencing heartache or have wrecked their lives, or when he encounters things in the world that are not the way that they are supposed to be, he sighs. It just breaks his heart. And it's not just, oh, okay, so he does it in these two little stories. He does this over and over and over and over. I'll give you a couple examples. In John chapter 11, there's a famous story where Jesus goes to the tomb of his dear friend Lazarus. His friend Lazarus had been sick for some time while Jesus was out of town, and by the time Jesus gets to the town, it's too late. Lazarus had passed, and when Jesus goes to the graveside, our translations say he was deeply moved in spirit. What John wrote in Greek was not the words deeply moved in spirit. He used a word to describe the sound that horses make when they're angry. It's a snort kind of sound. And so I don't know, but I think it's probably wise and best that the English translators didn't say he went to the gravesite and he started snorting, but that would be confusing for us. But the point is he goes to the burial plot of his friend, and there is something just visceral, primal that comes out. He makes some noise when he looks at death in the face. Luke chapter 19, it's a story where Jesus is drawing closer to the city of Jerusalem, and he has experienced people's resentment and people's rejection of him and just their unwillingness to embrace the one who God has sent for them. And it says that he weeps over the city. He's going closer to the city and he sees it and he just feels this is not the way that this is supposed to go down. And he just weeps. In fact, the word that is most often used to describe Jesus' emotional life is the word compassion. He looked at this crowd and he had compassion on them, or he's talking to so-and-so and he had compassion on him over and over and over, compassion, compassion. The word compassion, the root word passion is the word to suffer. And the prefix come just means with. So compassion literally means at a word level to suffer with. It means to see someone, interact with someone who is suffering, who is hurting. And Jesus has such a level of empathy that it draws out pain in his own heart. He hurts with others as they are hurting. And so there's many more examples that you can give describing Jesus, but I mean, the Bible describes Jesus as a man of sorrows, well acquainted with grief. Here's what I want you to realize. Jesus is not a stoic. He's not a stoic. We've all seen pictures or paintings of Jesus where he's serenely holding a lamb or peacefully talking to children, and he's got long blonde hair, and he looks like he's from Norway. And it just gives you the impression that Jesus is such like a weirdly otherworldly Zen figure that just kind of floats along the surface of life, and that is not the picture that you get in the Bible. Jesus is going around from place to place, and he is constantly getting his heart broken. He is constantly sighing, constantly groaning. He's a man of sorrows. There's so many implications you could draw, but I'll just do one before we move on. When you see the pain and the tragedy in the world, and you weep over it, and sometimes you don't even know what to say. It's just a sound comes out. Ugh. You read the headline. Ugh. That is not you expressing a lack of faith. That's you actually looking like Jesus in that moment. Jesus sees hard things and he grieves and rages and grunts and snorts and groans. That's what I want you to see first. That Jesus sighs. But you can go a step deeper and you explore why is Jesus sighing in the first place? And what's fascinating about these two stories is that they're different. The circumstances are different, but they both draw that noise out of Jesus. So let's look at one of them. Let's look at them one at a time. First one, story number one, it says that Jesus is in the region of the Decapolis, which, if you've been with us for a while, a few weeks ago we looked at in Mark chapter 5 when he goes to the crazy demon guy who has all these demons. His name is Legion. That's in the region of Decapolis. He's back in that same area. And verse 32 says that they bring him, we don't know who they are, there's just a group of people, they're bringing this guy to Jesus who is deaf and he can't hear, and he has some form of a speech impediment. We don't know if he can't speak very well or just he can't speak at all. But anyway, they bring this guy to Jesus so that Jesus touches him and heals him and does something, fix him, help. And what Jesus does with this guy is very strange, at least the first time you read it. Because it says he separates him from the rest of the group, he takes him aside privately, and it says Jesus puts his fingers in his ears, and then Jesus spits. And we don't know where or on what, spitting on his hands, spitting on the ground, spitting in his face, we don't know. He spits, and then he touches the dude's tongue, that's an intimate space. He's getting quite personal. And he's interacting with him in a way that is just like, what is going on? There are so many scholars and Bible commentators that have spilled a lot of ink trying to make sense over what in the world is going on, especially because the story right before this, which we looked at last week, is a story of a woman who comes to Jesus who wants help for her daughter who's not even there. She's back home. And Jesus heals this woman's daughter with just a thought, just a word. He didn't have to go be present. He didn't have to spit, didn't have to touch. So it feels a little unnecessary. If Jesus can just heal this guy, why does he interact with him in this way? And I think the best explanation is actually provided by a guy named Sinclair Ferguson. He's an author, he's a pastor, and he said, it's just a speculation, but I tend to think he's onto something. He said, okay, here's a man who has lived his whole life in silence, or lived a large part of his life in silence, and he cannot communicate, cannot speak. So Jesus communicates to him in the only language that this guy can really understand, which is the language of touch. It made me think of this, and I think this will connect, but I'm sure like some of you, my wife and I, we just finished watching season 2 of The Pit. I don't know if y'all have seen The Pit, Baby Jane Doe, but it's a medical drama of a emergency room in Pittsburgh. And I've just started to notice whenever they wheel in somebody who's been injured or they're hurt, they're bleeding, they're crying, they're coming in and out of consciousness, when the medical team there at the pit receives them, they always look at them and communicate with them as they're being wheeled back. We've got you. Like, we have you. You're safe now. We like, what they're doing is they're reassuring them. I know you're freaking out. I know you're scared. We got this. Here's a man who has been in silence his whole life, and I think when Jesus touches him, it's Jesus' way of saying, hey, I'm right here. I got you. You're safe. You're in good hands now. Especially when you think about the fact that, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard this. This may be true. You've heard this. That if you lose one of your senses, your other senses get heightened. And so if he's lost this sense of hearing and his touch is really heightened, it would be so meaningful for Jesus to be this close, this face. I'm right here, buddy. I'm right here. You're safe. And it says that Jesus looks up to heaven and he sighs. Before he heals him, he looks up. It's this expression of, this is not the way it's supposed to be. People are not supposed, their bodies are not supposed to be broken like this. It almost feels like it's too much for Jesus. It's not. Nothing's too much for Jesus, but he has this reaction that just shows you it has broken his heart. So that's story number one. And then story number two, you have the Pharisees, which are the religious leaders, and they come to Jesus, and it says that they're arguing with him. It says in verse 11 that they were trying to test the fraud. They're trying to trip him up in his own words. So the whole conversation begins with them being very adversarial, which, that's not fun to be around when people just are coming at you out of nowhere, and they want a sign. They're saying, Jesus, show us a sign. In other words, we don't trust you. Do something. Give us some proof why we should believe you. And it says that Jesus deeply sighs. One commentator says this is a noise of profound anguish over their hard-heartedness. And Jesus asks them in verse 12, he says, why does this generation ask for a sign? Y'all have been given so many signs. I have given you countless signs. And if you're not going to pay attention to those, if you're not going to consider honestly the evidence that has already been provided for you, one more sign is going to be meaningless. And so he says to them, no sign will be given. And he gets in his boat and leaves. Now you zoom out. Why did Jesus sigh in both of these scenarios? In story number one, he's looking at somebody's broken body, and it causes him to sigh. And then the second story, he's looking at somebody's rejection of Jesus, somebody who is just so not open to who Jesus is at all, so hard in their heart. And he looks at someone like that and he sighs. So the first story is very physical, broken bodies. Second story, you might say, is very spiritual, broken souls. Both draw out grief in Jesus. And I think it's important for us to think about, okay, if that's what draws grief out of Jesus, both of these, are those two arenas the same things that draw grief out of us? Because we live in a day and an age, a current cultural moment, where we tend to pick sides. And I'm going to speak in broad, general terms, but, give me the benefit of the doubt. This is not true across the board, but generally speaking, you might say progressive people, or even secular people, tend to emphasize and really care about the physical, but not as much care about the spiritual. Again, generalization. But I think people on this side, the caricature would say, what really matters is the fact that our social structures are so broken, and we need healthcare reform, and we need better gun laws, and we need better accountability around immigration. We need better laws. The physical is stuff that is what matters, but when it comes to your spiritual life and what you believe, that conversation is in a different category. Whatever is true for you. Who am I to challenge that? But what matters is the physical, not the spiritual. And then, again, generally speaking, people on the other side, conservative, maybe more traditional religious people, emphasize and really care about the spiritual, don't really value the physical as much. So people on this side would say, well, what really matters is, things like the church and family values and evangelism and getting people in the kingdom. But, feeding the hungry, that's nice, but it's not, we don't care about that. I once heard someone in a particular ministry say that there is no benefit in providing a meal for someone who is hungry and who is also going to hell. What's the point of feeding somebody a meal if they're just going to hell? You're just wasting the food. Oh, okay. But you see the difference of, you got people over here, what matters is the physical, not the spiritual. You got people over here, what matters is the spiritual, not the physical. You got Jesus, and he cares about both. With Jesus, you don't have to pick sides. He's grieved over both because he cares about both. And if people are going to claim to follow Jesus, then the followers of Jesus must also care about both. Because human beings are not just bodies, and human beings are not just souls. Human beings are bodies and souls together. We are physical, spiritual beings. So here's the last question. Okay, so Jesus is sighing a lot. His heart is breaking a lot. What does that mean for you and me? It's a lot of things, but I'll try to give you three things briefly. Knowing that and knowing why Jesus sighs, it gives us sensitivity, it gives us comfort, and it gives us hope. How does it give us sensitivity? One of the metaphors that the Bible uses when it talks about someone becoming a Christian, it says that they're born again, or they become a new creation. It's trying to get at this idea of you've been really transformed from the inside out. One of the metaphors is from Ezekiel 36, where God says, I'm going to take out your heart of stone, and I'm going to give you a heart of flesh. Now, heart of stone, this is stone. This is cold, hard, immovable, insensitive. You can kind of just slam on this all day long, and this is not moving. But a heart that is made of flesh is soft and sensitive and vulnerable. And so I think part of what's going on with that image is that when you become a Christian, you get more of a heart. You feel things more deeply as a Christian, which means as a Christian, you're more sensitive than you may have been before. You have more joy as a result of being transformed by Jesus, but it is also true that you have more sadness because you have more of a heart. You have more of a heart. So if you claim to follow Jesus, if you claim to, I've been transformed, my heart is made of flesh, not stone. Okay. When you see and think about so many people that live in our neighborhood here in Midtown who don't know Jesus, and we believe that Jesus is the source of life, they're disconnected from the source of life, does that grieve you? Does it break your heart? Or when you just drive around our city and you see the poverty and you see how inequitable the resources are distributed, and you see the addiction and just the brokenness in front, does it grieve you? Does it break your heart? When you see on a national scale, or I guess international scale, global scale, the wars, the political assassination attempts, the violence, the way that we talk to each other in our civil discourse, all the rage, no one's listening, everybody's just throwing things at each other. Doesn't that it just breaks your heart? As you follow Jesus, your heart becomes more sensitive, not less. You might grieve and weep more as a Christian than you did before. And another thing, one more thing before I move on, I think this also transforms how you respond to people when they share their heart with you. If you've ever had the privilege of having another human being share their heart with you, it is quite an honor to have someone be vulnerable and say, here's what I'm feeling, or here's what I'm scared about, or here's what I've experienced. And if you are anything like me, my reflex is to fix it. Let me give you some advice. Here's what you do, just do this. The longer I've walked with Jesus, the older I've gotten, I've realized that maybe the wisest response is compassion, hurting with, weeping with, or just simply, a sigh. Because sometimes there are no words. You can't fix every problem that gets presented. So we're given sensitivity, and here's the second thing that Jesus sighing also gives us. It gives us comfort. It gives us comfort. Because it gives you a window into how the Lord of the universe feels about what is breaking your heart. When he sees your marriage difficulty and your addiction, and he sees the chronic pain that you've experienced, and he sees the grief that you've endured because of a loss of a loved one or a friend, when he sees it, his heart breaks and he groans and he is grieved by it. It is so natural for fallen human beings when we experience hard things, we ask, don't you care? That's what we looked at a number of weeks ago. And in Mark chapter 4, when the disciples are out on the sea and there's this big storm that comes through, they look at Jesus, don't you care? I thought you cared about us. Don't you care that we're hurting? Can't you do something about this? And it is so comforting to know that when God looks and sees and experiences what is breaking your heart, it breaks his heart. If he were really distant, removed, impervious to anything happening in the world, he wouldn't grieve. He wouldn't sigh. But you see over and over the way he responds. And we'll take this even one step further. This is really mysterious, but Paul writes this. He has this mysterious section in the book of Romans. And I'm going to read to you what he writes. And this is Romans chapter 8, verse 26. Paul says, "Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words." Paul just said, sometimes you experience things that are so devastating and so overwhelming, you don't know what to pray for as you ought. Just think about it. How do you pray for the city of Memphis? Where do you start? It's so complicated. It's so complex. There's such a messed up history of injustice and pain. And how do you pray for it? How do you pray for the thing that you're experiencing in your body where you're like, okay, do I pray for God to take this thing away and remove it? Or do I pray for the strength to be able to endure it? What do you pray for? And Paul says, when you don't know what to pray for and you have trusted in Jesus, God sends his Spirit to take up residence in your very being. And that Spirit, who's the third person of the Trinity, is praying to God the Father with groans on your behalf. That is so mysterious. I don't know how to wrap my head around that. But the comfort of it is knowing that God has not left you alone. He himself comes, and when you don't know what to pray and you're so overwhelmed, this may be happening right this very moment, that the Holy Spirit inside of you is praying to God the Father on your behalf because of what you're experiencing, and the prayer is just, groans too deep for words. Now, you might hear that and you say, that's not really all that comforting. To think, okay, God's just heartbroken over what is painful in my life, but okay, he's God. He can do something. I can't do anything about it. He can. Well, that leads us to the third thing that Jesus sighing gives us. It gives us hope. Every scholar and commentator that I read said when Mark wrote chapter 7, he had to have had Isaiah chapter 35 in the back of his mind as he did it. Because Isaiah 35 is this picture about what the future world will look like when God's kingdom comes in all of its fullness. I'm just going to read you one little section. It says this: when God's kingdom comes in all of its fullness, quote, "Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped, and the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy." And listen to this: "and sorrow and sighing shall flee away." Mark is showing us when Jesus is healing this guy, he is injecting a bit of the future into the present. That there is this world out there to come where eyes will be opened and clogged up ears will be opened, and it will be an eternity of such joy that there will be no more sorrow. There will be no more sighing, groaning over the way that the world is not the way that it's supposed to be, because the world will finally be the way it's supposed to be. Now you can hear that and say, well, how do you know that that is true? Here's how. A few chapters after this, you get to Mark 15, and Jesus is on a cross. And when he is on the cross, the Bible tells us he is not just bearing our sin, though he is, but he is bearing everything that is wrong with the world. It says that he bore our griefs and he carried our sorrows. And as he is bearing in his very body everything that's wrong with the world, in order to deal with it, he quotes Psalm 22. Let me read you the first part of Psalm 22. my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning?" Jesus lets out the ultimate groan on the cross to purchase for us a world in which there is no more groaning. He sighs the ultimate sigh on the cross so that one day, someday, we would be able to live in a world with no more sighing, no more suffering. But until then, and when you know that that is the reality, that that is the hope coming that has been purchased purely by grace because of Jesus, you can do what Paul said in 1 Thessalonians 4 when he says that we grieve, but not as those without any hope. We grieve, but we don't grieve in a way that's just hopeless. We grieve with hope. But the hope doesn't mean that you don't grieve. You don't have grief. It's both. So I think the invitation of this passage is, as we groan through life in a fallen world, it is to look to that hope that Jesus has purchased for us on our behalf by his grace, to have your soul anchored to that hope so that we might groan, we might grieve, we might have comfort, we might have hope. That's the invitation. As we groan through this life, anchor your soul to the hope of the day to come. Let me pray. Father, thank you for your compassion and your empathy and your kindness, that you deeply care about what breaks our hearts. And you want our hearts to be so synced up to yours that our hearts would break over what we know breaks your heart. And so would you do that in us? Would you make our hearts more vulnerable, more sensitive, more alive, more of a heart, that we might grieve well, we might rejoice well, we might sigh and groan well. Do for us what we cannot do for ourselves, and we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.